Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My guest today holds a truly unique position. There is only one of them in the entire country. Among Canadian universities, the role of the Rector is exclusive to Queen's University, a position rooted in Scottish tradition that dates back to the University of Edinburgh. Niki Boytchuk-Hale was elected the 39th Rector of Queen's University in February of 2024 and officially took office in May. A Queen's graduate with degrees in fine arts and education, she is currently completing a Master of Education while serving as a key representative and advocate for the university's nearly 30,000 students. In this episode, we explore the history and responsibilities of the Rector's role, the key student issues she's addressing in 2025, and the initiatives she's championing, such as Hate Has No Home Here, and a special Remembrance Day event honoring Indigenous veterans. We'll also discuss what inspired her to step into this leadership role and what she hopes to take away from the experience. This conversation was recorded in early February 2025. Niki, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for the invitation.
Before we even begin our conversation, I have to acknowledge the fact that you are a particularly unique individual when it comes to your position.
I am.
You're the only rector at the university level in the country. Generally, describe the role of a rector at a university.
Yeah, so it can be, I guess, divided into a few different categories, although every day and week is a little bit different. One of my roles is ceremonial. So along with the chancellor and the principal, I preside over convocation, and I also confer awards like the honorary degree recipients. So that's kind of, the public-facing big events I'm there for. I'm also really tightly woven into the university governance as well as the student governance. So from the university side, I sit on the board of trustees, and I'm a member of several of the committees of the board. And I often get called upon to be a part of other committees struck within the institution. So most recently, we just wrapped up and announced the incoming dean of the Faculty of Education, and that was one of the committees I was a part of. There'll be other kind of working groups, like right now we're doing a review of academic accommodations. And then I'm also really intertwined into student governance, like I said. So I sit on the AMS Assembly, which is the undergraduate student body highest assembly, and the SGPS Council, so the equivalent for grad students. So I report to them every month with a written report and oral remarks. And then I also, like any other rector, run on a election platform, and I have my own goals that I want to achieve while in office, and so I've hired some students and we're working away on projects that I hope to accomplish.
Now, the history of this role goes back to the sister university for Queen's, and that's located in Edinburgh, Scotland. Do you know why Queen's here decided to go with a rector? Like, what's the history of this role?
I think that probably the archivists at Queen's would have a much better answer. But my understanding, it actually used to be someone who was completely outside of the university holding the role, usually someone within actually the government. And I think Queen's probably really enjoyed having the third officer of the university being so close in that role. And at a certain point, students had a little bit of an uprising and convinced the university that for a role representing students should be a student. And so from then on, it has been an election by students for students. And And that's why I'm here.
1968 was the first year in which a student was elected as the rector. And as you mentioned before, it's a position where you are elected. And we'll get to that in a bit. Before we go any further, you've already started to talk a little bit about it, and I think it may be a little confusing if someone goes to the website of any university and they see what the governance structure is and they're going, what is going on here? So you have the Board of Trustees, and you have the Senate, and you have the University Council, and various academic
and so actually, I'm empowered by the University Council. So that's the governing body that ratifies my election, actually.
So can you give us a snapshot of what these three bodies are responsible for?
Yep.
Not in any great detail, because that may take a while.
So University Council is an interesting one and probably the most unique to Queen's. It's a body that was established many decades ago when Queen's was experiencing some really, really difficult financial pressure, and a very generous donation was made by a group of alumni with the caveat that this kind of oversight council needs to be formed to keep the university accountable. So it's morphed from there, but University Council is made up of elected alumni. It's chaired by our chancellor, and the principal is also on it. I am not on University Council, although I get invited to participate in their annual gatherings, and that's just what it is. They meet every year, and they're like an advisory board of alumni that really care about Queen's. We have lots of young alumni and more mature alumni on that. And then the Senate oversees essentially our academic matters at Queen's. So all of the deans and the provost sit on Senate. And because Queen's acknowledges that we need, a multitude of perspectives, including students, there are student senators and faculty senators that represent every single faculty, and they meet once a month to approve a number of items that are of deep interest to our academics. And the Board of Trustees oversees or ensures the financial stability and long-term longevity of our institution from, they look at things like risks, especially. And we meet about quarterly.
I appreciate the reference to more mature alumni.
Yep.
Okay. Politically correct.
Yep.
You mentioned the officers of the university. So that's the chancellor, the principal, and yourself. Now, the chancellor, for those folks who may not know the university or know Kingston very well, the current chancellor was appointed late last year, and her name is Sheila Rogers, and I can say a little bit about her because she and I worked together way back when she first started in radio, and I was a little ahead of her in her radio career. She went on to become a well-known, award-winning host and broadcaster for the national radio network called the CBC here in Canada. And she's also been a serious proponent and sponsor of events related to mental health and Indigenous rights. And from what I am told, and I attended a reception for her in December, I believe, at the beginning of December, and her appointment as chancellor was voted on with lightning speed by whichever group actually votes for her. So she has just taken on her role. And can you describe, for those who may not know too much about the principal, Patrick Dean?
About the principal's role? Yeah. So,
or about him personally.
Oh, about him. Yeah. So hopefully I don't get anything wrong here. Apologies, Principal Dean, if I do. He's actually no stranger to Queen's. He served as our provost and vice principal academic a number of years ago, and then went off to McMaster and has since returned. He's currently in his second term as principal. So a little bit of very quick background for our administration. This wasn't always the case, but it is more recently in our history been the case. Roles like senior leadership type of roles, including deans, you can only serve for a maximum of 2 terms. One term is 5 years. So he's in his second term now. He went through the process of getting renewed. And he's got a really interesting background. He's a professor in, I want to say, like, Old English literature or something like that. He's from South Africa. And I work really closely with the principal and the chancellor. Shout out to you, Chance, as I call her. She's the best. And we both will say that we don't have a lot of power, but we have a lot of influence in our roles.
We talked about some of the other groups around the university, and they are many in number in some cases. In the case of the officers, it's just the three of you. Did the three of you ever sit down and have conversations about what's going on and plan some course of action that you may want to take?
We do. I get to meet with the principal every single month. We sit down and each of us bring some items to the table. A lot of times it's me informing him about things that are happening in the student body, or we'll, bounce through ideas. I've worked on a couple of projects with the principal's office so far in my term, and he's been very supportive with those, making sure I have the funding to be able to achieve them. And same thing goes with the chancellor. She's been coming about once a month because she does not actually live in Kingston or Ontario. So she comes down, and every time she's around, we get to share a coffee and a butter tart, and we get up to we come up with a lot of ideas during those hours.
A butter tart.
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about you. Why Queens? Why did you come to Queens in the first place?
Yeah, I don't think I realized just how perfect Queens was for me until I got here. Like, I really wanted to come the moment I stepped on campus for a tour in high school. I did a Bachelor of Fine Art and the Con Ed program. So this is actually now that I'm in my master's, this is my 6th year here. And so I'm wondering when I get to call myself a Kingstonian. How many years do I have to reach? But it really was like the perfect degree plan for me, doing a really intimate, technical visual art program while being able to acquire teachables in art and Indigenous studies. The Indigenous studies curriculum in Ontario was newly established in 2019, and that's the year I started, and I chose that as my teachable, and that wasn't really an option. The same configuration of visual art and high school and Indigenous studies was like a perfect combination for me that I couldn't get anywhere else. So I got very, very lucky there. And I love the town. It's kept me here.
In answer to your question, I've been told that to be considered a real Kingstonian, you have to have 3 generations of ancestors buried in one of the local cemeteries.
Okay, so I got a long time to go.
So neither of us are going to qualify. What inspired you to run for the position of rector?
Yeah, it wasn't in my original game plan. I'm definitely a planner, but I thought that I was going to finish my 5th year and finish Teachers College in this last July, and leave and go teach. And then the fall, I started really thinking about staying to do my master's. I knew I always wanted to do more school. I love being in school. And I had realized I'm really settled here, and I'm young, and I don't have any responsibilities. So I might as well just get it done now while I can. And the previous rector decided to resign, which is very common. The last decade or so, rectors have resigned after 2 years because they're done their program typically, but technically in the Constitution, it's a 3-year term.
Okay.
But it's been kind of a tradition that you resign after 2 years. So I knew that was coming up, and I had worked in the AMS student government for a number of years up until senior management. And then when I was in Teachers College, I was the vice chair of the board and oversaw the governance committee and was involved in some other areas of the university. And I felt like I had a really good understanding of students and student experiences and student governance, as well as the way the university works. And I thought it'd be a really great fit for me. So I decided to run.
So you're no stranger to committee work.
No, my life is committees, actually. That's all I do for the most part.
Describe a little bit the campaign that takes place on a campus like this when you're running for a position such as this.
Yeah, so Queen's student government and elections is really no joke. I can't even imagine running for like a real election locally, provincially, nationally, because of how crazy the month was for me running. But I have a background in marketing communications, and so I planned as far in advance as I could, getting as much done as possible, and I formed a campaign team, so campaign manager, a policy advisor, brand ambassadors that were making like TikTok videos, and I had a debate coach. Last year we had he's since graduated, we had one of the best student debaters in Canada, and he like prepped me, and so it was really a massive team effort. And there's about a week and a half of campaigning where we're like, I'm running around campus, going into lecture halls, giving quick talks to any professor that would give me 2 minutes of their class time, and boothing and just getting out there as much as I can.
A lot of fun.
Yes.
And you won.
And I won.
So you're elected in 2024 in February, and you started your first day in May.
May 1st.
What was the first thing you did on day one?
I'm like trying to think back to what I did. I know I was really excited, and I don't remember what I did on day one, but I remember day 10 was my first Board of Trustees weekend, and that's a really intense weekend. And about a week before the board meets, we get a package that's like hundreds of pages of reading materials. So probably on day one, I was reading the upcoming materials and writing my first speech to the board.
For those people who don't know the university, what kind of constituency do you have, like numbers?
Yeah, so...
Do you represent the whole student body?
Yeah, so that's what's unique about the role. There's undergraduate and graduate student unions, but they only represent those students. I was elected by, and my constituents are the entire student body. So undergrad, master's, PhD, professional students. I serve, and so I'm meeting with them. I'm answering questions. I'm trying to connect them and going to their events and hearing them out and passing along vital information to my colleagues in the administration. So that's about close to 30,000 students at Queen's.
In 2025, what are some of the key student issues that come across your desk? Give me a couple of those.
Yeah, so one of the heaviest ones I would say is, and it happens because I oversee the Rector's bursary, which was a bursary founded by past rectors. And so when students have a emergency, unexpected cost arise, they can reach out to me, and I can essentially request the university to give them some money from this fund. And the reason why it's so important is there's a lot of financial aid options at the university, but there's certain parameters that you have to work around, and I can basically give it out.
Cut through that stuff.
Yeah, so if you're an international student, your options are very limited, for example, or if you're a grad student, and so I can kind of work around those. So because of that, or students knowing that I'm very connected and I know a lot about policy and about our structures, they'll come to me with academic issues that they're working through, and I can help connect them to the right people or guide them through what they should say or who they need to speak with, whether it's a dean or someone else. I also work a lot with the student government about what they're advocating for, and I can help convey that information in my meetings with the university. And I find they'll also share that with them, but they don't get that FaceTime as often, and sometimes it's important to hear the same thing over from different people many times. Like, I have so many issues that come across my desk every day, and I'm sure that's amplified for our administration. And you can't take on everything, but if you hear the same issue enough, then it might, wake you up that something needs to happen. So I try to be a really good ally for the student government. So things like food insecurity and housing issues are really big ones right now, as well as the accommodation systems for Queens. There was an independent review and report was released this last summer, and I'm on that committee that's basically deciding how to move forward with some of those recommendations.
Do the concerns that come across your desk, are they basically concerns that are shared by different student groups across campus, or are there different ones for different groups?
Yeah, I'd say that there are some distinctions between issues that graduate students are facing versus undergraduate as far as like student experience, or most recently the principal has announced planning for what he's calling the bicentennial vision. And the concerns with that, I'd say like graduate students are really concerned about research opportunities, whereas undergraduate students might be a little bit more concerned with class sizes and the experiences associated with that.
How engaged are the students that you come into contact with? I would imagine there are times when you want to send out some sort of survey or get people to give you feedback on certain issues. How engaged is the student body these days?
I'd say there's always students who are listening and watching every single step I take. I've been able to kind of bring the social media of the Office of the Rector back to life, and that's been largely possible because I've hired student staff to essentially follow me around at a lot of events I'm at and help film and things like that. So there are students that reach out to me often to come to their events, their club events, to meet with them. I get a lot of, emails asking for help. I get some criticism, but I haven't, gotten too stuck with that. I'd say I think everything I've done has had a pretty good reaction, and I think the reason why is I do my homework, mm-hmm. and before I speak to anything, I really try to understand students' experiences. And I'd say one of the most important parts of this role is it's my job to carry multiple perspectives. I can never get rid of my bias and what I'm really interested in. That's always gonna, show itself in some ways, but I try my best when I'm speaking at AMS Assembly, for example. I'll often bring forward other students' perspectives that I might not even agree with, but I think that it needs to be said and discussed anyway. There's always going to be students who don't know what the rector is and don't care about Queen's governance, and I think that's totally fine. If you want to come to Queen's, get your school done, make some friends, and leave, that's totally okay. But we do have a really engaged student population that holds their leaders accountable, and I think that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a couple of specific projects you've been involved with to give folks an idea of specifically what sorts of things you've been doing. Let's start with Hate Has No Home Here.
Oh, yeah. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners would recognize that campaign title. So the artist, Aylesworth, we did a Bachelor of Education together. So we just finished Teachers College. That's how I met Hill. We both have art teachable. So we were in class twice a week together. And I knew that when I was starting my term that I wanted to amplify student advocacy goals. That was one of my platform pillars. And what Hill has been doing and is doing was just seemed like it would fit so well with the kind of message that I wanted to get across. And because I work with faculty societies and clubs who have rooms on campus, I wanted to get that poster in all of their rooms so that students coming in would see that message. And so I worked with Hill and the poster manufacturer printer to put our logos on it and hand them out to students. And when the some of the university administration saw it, and they actually asked for them to print some more. So we got that poster edition of the Rector's office one put up in every single residence building across campus so that all first years would also see it. So there's been a few hundred put up around campus from my office, but there's also other ones. Hills, it's like a never-ending, totally expanding project, and I'm very proud to know them.
The other one that I saw was Remembrance Day for Indigenous Veterans.
Yes. That one, that was a surprise to me. When I started the role, there was a little bit of a transition period in the month or so leading up to when I started the role with the previous rector, and I got, information about different projects that always happen and committees, but Remembrance Day wasn't something brought up to me, and it wasn't until the chaplain reached out to me, and the rector traditionally reads in Flanders Field, and I wanted to have a little bit more of an impact on the ceremony. So in the months leading up, I did some of my own advocacy work to include the perspective of Indigenous veterans. There's some really fascinating history behind the contributions that really only Indigenous veterans were able to make. Like Cree people were able to get messages across that couldn't be decoded because not many people knew Cree. So there's these really unique experiences that I wanted to be acknowledged. We have a professor who wrote a book about a World War I sniper. And so I reached out to the Queen's Native Student Association, which is a club, and their president said that they would come and read a couple of those poems from the book. And it turned out that her great-grandfather or grandfather, I forget which one, is actually a veteran, and that was something really close to her heart. So it was kind of perfect, and it was a beautiful ceremony. We didn't take anything away. We only added, and I really hope that's something that we continue on, because it's not that often that Queens changes up the way they do things or ceremonies. So it took a little bit of work, but it turned out great.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think this role works as rector?
That's a good question. I think that it speaks volumes that Queens is so committed to allowing students into these conversations and these committees. A previous board chair, actually our last one, would talk about like there's this secret sauce at Queens, and our students and our alumni are so engaged. And I think part of it is because we have the opportunity to sit in these conversations. I think that the role works from my perspective because I'm able to build really strong relationships with the administration and with the students. And that's the reason why I'm able to get stuff done. Like I've spent, and I'm still doing it, but I really spent the first couple semesters getting to know people from like a human perspective and building trust. And now like, when I call the board chair up or I say something to the principal, like they really take me seriously and understand where I'm coming from and listen. And we don't always see eye to eye on everything, but I've been able to get a lot done because of that trust that we've been able to build.
Why is it still unique among other Canadian universities?
I don't know. I think so. Other universities have student government leaders, but they're in their own organizations that are technically external. Like there's a lot of student unions that Queen's, AMS, for example, works with. I don't know why other universities don't have someone kind of baked into the system, but
it would be nice to have other folks that you could share ideas with.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
I definitely am. I'm sometimes a little bit of a lone wolf, and that's why I hired staff in my office, one to help me get more done, but also so I had people to share things with. Otherwise, I am a little bit alone.
You sound very busy. I'm wondering how much time do you have to spend on that master's program?
I'm getting it done. My first semester.
I'm sure your advisor isn't listening.
Yeah. You know what? She's actually about to go on maternity leave. She's about to have a baby herself. So that might be good for both of us. Oftentimes the rector is an undergrad student because the election tends to favor undergrad students because there's more voters in that body. It worked in my favor because I was here for my undergrad. I hadn't left. But often they do like 5 years instead of 4 in their undergrad, and so they're taking a reduced course load. I've already been here for 5 years, and I didn't want to extend a 2 years master's even longer. So I was able to work my courses out to be pretty manageable. And I don't know, it all gets done. Something I've been able to do is the books I'm reading for my studies, I barely have time to do that. It's not like I have too much time to read other things that would help me in my role. So I've been able to find a lot of connections. Like a lot of my board speeches, I've quoted books that I've read for my master's, and it works.
When your term is up, which I believe is you have another year left in your term.
Yeah, so technically like I can be in this role for 3 years, and I haven't like announced what I'm going to do. But this master's will be over in the summer of 2026.
So let's not put a label on it. We'll just say when your term is up, what will you take away from this role?
Everything. I don't want to leave anything behind. It's really a masterclass in people, in policy, in university governance, in bureaucracy, in relationships. Like I'm learning, some of the committees I've been on have been so hefty that I've said to the principal, like, I feel like I'm learning more than any graduate level seminar course could teach me. And I know that whatever I do, whether I go and, become a high school teacher or do something else, these experiences I will use forever.
Niki, I want to thank you very much for giving us some time today. And as one of the many alumni of this university, I sincerely thank you for taking on this very important responsibility.
Thank you. It's an honor.
And all the best in your next section of your term as rector and in whatever you decide to do when you leave here.
Thank you.
My guest in this episode was Niki Boytchuk-Hale, the rector at Queen's University in Kingston. Our conversation was recorded in early February 2025. To those of you who have taken the time to listen, thank you. I'll be back soon with another conversation.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to the kingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.